Welcome back. We continue our discussion about the Triple Nexus and donor policies. Thanks for staying with us. I'm really pleased to welcome now a distinguished panel of 4 guests who confirmed straight away their attendance when we asked them if they would like to join us this morning. By the order of who we will talk to and the order of the panel, let me quickly name to you. We are very honored to welcome Dr. Michael Kohler, who's the Deputy Director General of ECHO, the Humanitarian and Civil Protection arm of the European Commission. Good morning, Mr. Kohler.
Good morning, Ralph. Good to be with you.
We welcome Diawari Bouare. He's the Country Director of Oxfam in Mali, a very interesting country you already touched on a minute ago. Good morning, Diawari.
Morning.
You can hear us, apparently, and we can hear you loud and clear. We are very proud to welcome Cecilia Roselli. She's the Director of Humanitarian Policy and of the Representation Office of the Norwegian Refugee Council in Geneva. And NRC has been really publishing on this issue and a real expert in this policy debate. So we are very happy to welcome Cecilia. Good morning.
Good morning, Ralph, and good morning, everyone.
And many thanks to Dr. Martin Schuldes joining us. He's the head of the Peace Division of the German Ministry for Development Cooperation and Economic Cooperation, BMZ. And he's has great experience in conflicts, as I will share with you in a minute. I guess most of the audience, and I hope most of our panelists, could follow already the pre-talk with Commissioner Kohler. So let's try to build on that. If we take now this more German-focused discussion on the European level, Michael Kohler, how would you judge on in which way the European policies are focusing in a more integrated way on humanitarian development and peace issues, and why is that? If you again try to put it in a nutshell of 2-3 minutes, like Frau Kohler did, that would be great. Frau Kofler did. Over to you. Why is this such a key topic for you? Right now we can...
Now you hear me. Now
yes,
you hear me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, it was a little bit difficult to unmute me, but now I'm here. No, I think the question is very easy to answer if you simply look at the situation on the ground. I mean, what is humanitarian aid for? Humanitarian aid is a policy that wants to help the most vulnerable, people who are affected by crisis, people who are in the need, people who we have to assist for reasons of humanity. Now, if you look at who these people are, then the figures, I think, speak a very clear language. We have, at this moment in time, according to international statistics, about 168 million people on this planet that need humanitarian assistance. And 80% of them, so almost the totality, lives in conflict. So, you know, whereas I think naively one could think that humanitarian aid is in particular about people who suffer from disasters, from tsunamis, from earthquakes and so forth, in reality, most of them suffer from a mix of problems, and a very big part of the cause of this is the human being. So in a situation where human suffering is caused very much by the intervention of other human beings, civil war, unfair distribution of resources, absence of social services, it is quite clear that you need to have a much more comprehensive approach in order to address the problem. Humanitarian aid, of course, has the advantage of being the first responder. We are there quickly, we are there probably as the first ones when a situation occurs. But at the same time, I often feel that we are like the people who have a fire extinguisher in their hands. The fire extinguisher works immediately, but it has very limited capacity. And unfortunately, what you can do with it is extinguish the fire, but you cannot prevent the fire breaking out again. Mm-hmm. So we need to look further. We need to go beyond let's say, initial impact, and we have to look at the root cause, we have to look at structures and so forth. Mm. And therefore, it is quite obvious that we need to bring in the development side. Now, what has become official doctrine of the European Union since 2017 is that we are not only speaking about the dual, but the triple nexus. There the peace building comes into being, But of course, if you look at a number of conflicts, be it in Yemen, be it Afghanistan, be it Mali, be it the Central African Republic, and so forth and so forth, you clearly see that the very cause of human suffering in the first place is conflict between groups in the society, ethnic groups, religious groups, social groups, interest groups. And therefore, peace activities, peace-building activities are ongoing. And you have to look at the proper articulation between what they are doing, what development, and what humanitarian is doing. I think that is the long answer to your very good short question.
Thanks for that. Maybe we dive into then the more challenging parts. If we have a consensus, apparently, on the analysis that we have interlinked challenges. To pick up your picture of the fire brigade, for firemen, it's extremely important that they are considered as helping everybody, to do it in a neutral way and to distinguish a fire wherever it is. The European policy is sometimes named, and you will tell us if you think that's fair, sometimes named as a prime example how this might be mixed with other interest, how it is needs-based, but in a way also focusing maybe less so on peace, but more on security issues, maybe on migration issues. And we can talk in more detail, for example, about budget issues, financial frameworks linked to that. But maybe if you would need to comment in a few phrases on the overall critique. Is that a fair critique, at least if we look at the past years, or is this misleading?
Well, I think it is difficult to answer your question, so to say, with one sentence, because you really have to look at the situation in every single theater and every single crisis scenario. If you were right, this would presuppose that there is some sort of master plan for a given crisis, and that some mastermind behind this master plan comes with an idea that Europe's interests are this and that, we should do this and that. Unfortunately, this is not true. Unfortunately, I'd say, because I think it would be good if we had that level of aggregation, that level of harmonization between individual policies and focusing them on one objective, which would be maybe the European interest. No, on the contrary, I think like many other donors, and I think Germany is another case in point, we are suffering from a lack of coordination. We are suffering from silo thinking. We are suffering from a fragmentation. So humanitarian responders do not have the instinct in the first place to think about what is really going on in the situation, what is the cause of conflict, what is the analysis. They're just rushing into it in order to help. Development people have a totally different perspective. Their, let's say, main issue is not necessarily fragility or vulnerability, but they want, for example, to work with state structures. They want to build partnerships. They want to build international cooperation. Vulnerable people are not necessarily, I mean, exceptions confirm the rule, their main focus. And of course, peace builders very often have a security focus. Now, these things work together sometimes in a way that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. I think what we try to do with the Nexus is to make these people sit around the same table. And first, before they get to action, really analyze the context, really try to understand what's going on and who are the players to the conflict. And on that basis, develop joint planning and ultimately perhaps joint action. In some crises, this works very, very well, in others less well. This has to do, I think, with two main factors. One is the situation on the ground. What are the constellations? What is the role of the government? What is the role of interest groups in a given crisis? But it also has to do very much with the people on the side of the aid agencies. Are they talking to each other or not? Right. And unfortunately, I think the human factor is, again, the weak link here. For me, Nexus is not rocket science. Nexus is just the Latin translation of the British term or the English term of common sense. But if people don't want to offer common sense, if they don't want to sit at the same table, if they think that there needs to be a Chinese wall, a firewall between humanitarian development and peace building, then of course you have uncoordinated action, you have lack of efficiency, and sometimes you have indeed individual sector interest dominating over a, let's say, conflict-sensitive and over a people-focused approach. And that is a sad reality which we have to work against.
Picking up your request to talk about concrete examples, maybe we focus a bit now on the Sahel and Mali. If it's about common sense, I guess, and let me be the advocate for that, critics would say, well, yeah, it might be about common sense, and there might be a need to more appropriately link what we do in the humanitarian development peace world, but given the sensitivities involved, it's even more important that we do that on a sound basis, and we do that really focused on humanitarian development and peace needs. If we take Mali and Sahel, and a concrete tool the European Commission has used in the past years, the EU Trust Fund for this region, critics say, well, this is the integration of these split areas in a way which might be not appropriate, because it is linking rather security focus, rather anti-migration policies with something which should be impartial, humanitarian, and focus on peace efforts and peace for the country, peace for the people on the ground. You will be very well aware of these discussions, for example, about the EU Trust Fund, and same with the new EU financial framework, the discussion if there are different policies integrated in an inappropriate way. Is this a fair point that the EU Commission also need to readjust its balancing, integration versus separation of tasks where it's needed?
Well, first, let me be very open with you. I'm a huge fan of the European Trust Funds, and I'm really chagrined by the fact that very probably they're not going to survive the end of 2021. I think it's a huge mistake not to continue them for a variety of reasons. One reason, for example, is that the trust funds are the best example of proper coordination between the EU institutions and the EU member states. I've been in international cooperation for more than 30 years in the field, in the German government, and now in Brussels. I haven't seen any platform where coordination with the member states would be as good as in the case of the trust. Now, it is true that if you think of the Africa Trust Fund, which was a concrete deliverable of the Valletta Summit back in 2015, the genesis of that trust fund was, of course, to find a pool of money, so to say, that could be used in cooperation with African countries to stem irregular migration and fight its root causes on the African continent. So the origin of the trust fund was, in fact, so to say, something that was motivated by Europe's fears of irregular migration after the Syrian crisis in 2015. Now, that doesn't exclude that individual country programs under trust funds are extremely meaningful and do the right thing. And I think what has happened both in the Africa Trust Fund but also in the Mother Trust Fund for the Syrian crisis is that increasingly so, the trust fund has covered an area which is somehow the gray zone between humanitarian aid proper and development aid. Now, for this gray zone, there are many, many different names. Some call it resilience, some call it recovery, some call it stabilization, some call it humanitarian plus, and there may be other names around. Now, if this is implemented in a proper way, then it's a blessing. And therefore, I think the trust fund as such, or the way how we operate there, is not the key issue. The important issue is that there is money. But then the question is how this is used. And it needs to be used in a way that first is based on, as I said, a joint conflict analysis, which brings the various parties of the conflict together. Secondly, then the response needs to be coordinated. It needs to be coordinated with bilateral development aid, with what other donors are doing, for example, or Germany, France, the World Bank, and others. It needs to be coordinated also with humanitarian aid. And there, of course, there are many, many good examples. If you take the
Michael, can I interrupt you, because you will get the floor very soon again, and I'm really grateful for you because now we have a really nice controversy on the table, I believe, and we will surely come back to you. But if we give a chance to Diawari, who would be the perfect person, I think, to comment on what you outlined, and many thanks for being so opinionated, because I think few politicians would be so open with your views and on the pros of this approach, given that it's for sure promoting coordination. Diawari Bouari, you are the country director of Oxfam in Mali. You have vast experience, 30 years in development cooperation. You've been for 20 years with CARE. And you've been one of the coordinators of a statement on this very EU Trust Fund and European donor policies in Mali and in Sahel. This statement named the EU Trust Fund as a risky, dangerous tool because it might undermine neutral, impartial humanitarian action. And it asked NGOs, and many of them signed it, not to work with the EU Trust Fund. Could you elaborate a bit, given the pros Michael has so illustratively outlined, and that coordination has been much better in this Trust Fund? Why did you ask for the statement? Why did you coordinate it? And what came out of it? Over to you, Diawari.
Thank you, and hi to everyone. I'm happy to be part of this. Probably it's important also to put some context on my intervention. Just to clarify that the coordination that has happened, that is a coordination coming from the entire Federation of NGOs, international NGOs Mali, who have made a clear position statement for the double nexus versus triple nexus. And that was a common position, and there was over 90 international NGOs who signed up against this. And this is based on practical, what we are observing in the ground. What could be the risk? First of all, I need to recognize, as Michael said, definitely the Trust Fund has a lot of positive support. It's for the first time, and there are some kind of intent to connect humanitarian with the resilience recovery. We all recognize that, and that is well appreciated. However, we realize in the practice, it put in danger some of the critical principle, humanitarian principle. We as a humanitarian, we are all trying to preserve. The moment this is compromised, then we miss our core principle and our commitment against those humanitarian principles. And this is very important to keep in mind. If a donor support comes with some conditionalities that link to securities, military intervention, migration, then somehow it try to deviate from the basic need for those vulnerable, the conflict-affected community. So this is the most important element, I think. And when it's happened, the trust fund have been launched when the community has, we have already signed what we call the position paper on the nexus. When it's come, and then probably that's one of the questions we can elaborate on that, and there was a dilemma. How to do? This is one of the major funding mechanisms that's coming within this country with the challenging situation. Are we compromising our humanitarian mandate and take this money, or are we sticking to our humanitarian mandate? This is one of the controversy, this challenge we face. I do not want to enter on that because I'm quite sure we will come on that. But again, I needed to recognize that this specific example has been one of the challenging we face when dealing. I wanted to take some concrete field example. When you find yourself in the field as a humanitarian NGOs, military groups, G4, G5, or some of the MINUSMA are undertaking the same type of humanitarian intervention on the behalf of the community, those vulnerable community, so to build up their acceptances. This is creating a confusion on the ground. Who is a humanitarian, who is not? I think the mandate of each of those actors need to be clear. It's not one is important than another, but we need to be clear on our personal and our specific mandate to stick on that to avoid. For example, when we created that confusion, and this line is blurred. What's the component, the consequence? Military come, they do humanitarian, they go to school, they provide food and to communities. They go out. Then you come as a humanitarian in the same community. After, by the way, after the military has gone out, the armed group have come to the community and molest them because they have been in line and they have been complicit with the military. The same time, the next day, you as a humanitarian, you come to make it as an intervention. What will be the attitude of the community? They become a resistance because you are exposing them, because they are not making a clear distinction who is a humanitarian, who is a military. So this is a key element we are putting forward. We are not questioning the importance of the peace component, but as of now, there is a clear confusion and interpretation on the peace component. From us as a humanitarian, as an NGOs development actor, we look at it from the conflict sensitivity perspective. We look at the social cohesion building perspective. We look at also social protection. We look at local mediation. This for us is the key element we need to promote when we talk about peace. However, if peace is interpreted by someone as a stabilization, as a military perspective, then that creates a few confusion. That's why we are advocating to not to mix up this peace component when we talk about the nexus. I wanted to stop here first, and then probably we can elaborate. Thank you.
Thanks, Diawari. Many thanks for sharing these views and this example. Maybe to follow up on one point you said, it is risking what we do here on the ground. Given that we take the example of the EU Trust Fund, which integrates, for everybody who's not an expert, integrates funding for security issues, for development issues, for some migration issues. Having said that, sometimes there is a note and a view that humanitarians like to highlight that we need to act principled, etc. But in concrete terms, you have, of course, also these case studies, these countries, where actually it's very hard to identify what has been the impact by not following a very principled approach. So you named that in Mali, it has been risking humanitarian action. Have there been issues by Oxfam, by other agencies, following, for example, the acceptance of these funds, or that people knew that various actors and interests might be mixed on the ground? Can this be named in concrete terms, or is something you rather fear in the midterm, in the long run, or risk even for security of your staff?
Okay, good. I think this is interesting because we are talking from the principle and the ground experience. We share with our colleagues. We are a member of the NGOs Federation, and we have a group of coordination, what is humanitarian. All of the issues we are facing are discussed, and we're trying to find a solution together. I'm not trying to speak on the behalf of Oxfam here, because as I have been getting this mandate, one of my action was to engage with my peers, NGOs within the NGOs Federation. What's the common stand we need to take on this? So when we did that kind of common position note, definitely it was important because it was built based on the concrete field example, the fear, the concern we have. For example, the humanitarian access today is compromised in many places where you have military action. So this is one of the area, concrete example where you could see when there is a military intervention, when there is a zone, when there is a presence, a state control place or a no state control places, the level of access is totally different than when you have another places where there is no that kind of confusion, where the intervention of the military is not. So I cannot start and put pointing because we will never finish a concrete example we have been having. You have been stuck when you are under intervention, and they are scrutinying on you, on your staff, field staff, Who are your donors? And there have been staff who have been detained for months because they wanted to find out what is behind this intervention. By sticking to your humanitarian principle, thank God some of those humanitarians have been able to be released after a lot of scrutiny. Others have not got the same chance. So, community side, that is a staff. The risk staff are exposed on the continued days. We have a long list, but this platform is not the place where you could bring those specific.
Right. Many thanks for Diawari. Maybe we share this view quickly with Michael and give him a chance to react. Interesting to hear that from your view, locals, conflict parties, community level do distinguish. They do distinguish between actors, and it's not this notion we sometimes hear, well, if the white guy is coming, nobody cares because he's just mixed up with whoever, and it's very difficult to highlight the mandates, and that might be sometimes rather academic. Some people say. Well, Michael might say. Michael, you made the point, the key issue that there is money out there and it's not that important about the mandates. We have to think in an integrated way and to live in Nexus. How would you react to what Diawari reported from Mali on the impact of the EU Trust Fund? Does that make sense from your view?
Well, I think Diawari is very much right. I can very much agree with what he says, but I would like to dispel perhaps one misunderstanding. The EU trust funds altogether, including the one on Africa, including what it is doing in Mali, that is not humanitarian aid. This is development aid. Yeah, of course, on the ground, this distinction is not always that clear. Therefore, I spoke about a gray zone. But what DG ECHO, for example, is doing in Mali doesn't go through the trust fund. We have in the central Sahel, Burkina, Mali, Niger, we have more than 100 million euros a year that is implemented by partners such as Oxfam in a principled way. And obviously, humanitarian aid clearly follows a different line. The problem in Mali is that we don't have yet, and that is different from Burkina, for example, and even different from Niger, we do not yet have a strategy for the Nexus. We do not yet have, because of the political situation, because of the many challenges in the country, we do not yet have, let's say, a clear-cut plan. Who does what and how does this link? So what Diawari said is, I think, very well taken, but it shows that the Nexus is not even yet implemented. And that is one point. The second point I would like to make is that looking at it from a Mali point of view, I think Diawari is very, very right. But we should not succumb to one misunderstanding. The peace part of the Nexus is not about sending military in the first place. I think this is rather the exception to the rule. The peace element means conflict prevention. It means diplomacy. It means mediation. It means stabilization. It means peace building in its different forms, conflict resolution. It can mean peacekeeping. Yes, yes. And in Mali, we have this problem. And I'm sure that there are many, many abuses and many forms of, let's say, undue overlap, so to say, between what the military forces are doing and what humanitarian aid wants. We have altogether, not only in Mali, we have a very active dialogue with the military on civil-military cooperation, humanitarian aid. But two things are very clear. First, military and support by the military for humanitarian actions can only be the last resort. If we have no other access to vulnerable people, then we may also use the help of the military. And secondly, it's mainly the logistics that we need. Not the security, but the logistics. And even that, of course, can only be mobilized when we have the feeling that this does not make us part of the conflict. But I'll give you one example. If you go to Nigeria, if you go to Borno State in the northeast, where all the IDPs, and we're speaking about hundreds of thousands of them, are living in garrison towns, how do you want to supply them if you don't find some sort of understanding with the Nigerian military? Either you find this understanding, then you have access and can work, or you don't, and then these people are going to starve and have no education and no health services. So this is the stark choice before which you are. And of course, this can lead to a blurring of lines. I admit that. It can lead to misunderstandings, and it can lead to, let's say, situations that we should better avoid. I admit that.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm sure we come back later on to this topic of civil-military cooperation. And we might touch also on Mali, where humanitarian actors, when we've been there, for example, had also difficulties to name where they do have access and how this is built on neutrality and how they can access without coordinating in some way with military actors. Let's move on to another panelist. I'm really happy that Cecilia Roselli is with us. As mentioned, she's the Director of Humanitarian Policy in Geneva of NRC. NRC is not only an agency with vast policy capacities and lots of papers out there. They're also very focused in the various areas on donor policies and very outspoken on this one, while appreciating lots of reforms and movements which are welcomed, for example, by NRC. Cecilia, if we take this discussion a bit beyond first the German, now the European level, and look a bit on the international side, what's your analysis if you look at the nexus and how donors deal with it? Is there also some good news you could share?
Thank you, Ralph. It's rather challenging to come into this passionate debate and go back to my notes for this intervention, but I'll do my best to make it juicy. First of all, let me start by saying that the importance of the nexus is particularly relevant at this moment in time, and especially in this time of COVID-19, when all we are facing an immense challenge in being able to respond to the downward spiral of secondary impact consequences related to the crisis. And I would like to quote actually Mr. Köhler in one of his interventions at the beginning of May, when we had a discussion around the EU perspective around COVID-19 and the nexus, when he said that COVID-19 is basically a reality check for the nexus. And we all have to plan together, we all have to properly articulate the link between humanitarian and development. And it feels as if we have not failed, but it's a long way to go before we are able to really make sure that everything is in place to cope with the situation. Even if a fully funded humanitarian response plan is out there, which is not the case, alone it will not be able to support our efforts. And money, I also think money is not enough to address these challenges. And yesterday in your discussion, you were able to elaborate a lot around the discussion on what is needed also from a political level and in terms of engagement from leadership and in terms of will to prioritize lives and livelihood of what conflict affected people. But focusing on donor practices, which is what I would like to discuss today, I looked yesterday in preparing for this at the suggestions that we put forward a year ago with the humanitarian financing, the Nexus report, when we looked at gaps and opportunities from a field perspective. And some of the challenges and some of the suggestions are definitely still valid today. And I will not go through all of them in detail because I'm sure you have heard of it and you can have a look at the report when the time allows. But I would like to highlight a couple of challenges that are still extremely important for us to focus our attention on. The first is that there is limited coherence or at least limited evidence of coherence in financing the Nexus. And we can talk about some sort of complementarity sometimes, but coherence is not yet there. And the financing response across the Nexus is definitely uneven. We believe this is a make or break moment for us to ensure this coherence because we are united towards one challenge. And we have an opportunity that we cannot miss. Coordination and planning, ways of working at global as well as country level is far from being ideal. And we are really not up to speed with the high level commitment that we all make when we participate in this kind of events or platform. And what I hear from operational colleagues is that there is still very little provided between the programs that fall between masks and budget support. So there is really a lot we can do together about it. We are missing from this conversation the real player, development actors, that should be sitting at this table. We are missing the World Bank, the international financial institutions that have a role to play in all of this, not only in providing funding, but also in influencing the policy direction for this funding. Mm-hmm. I also feel that there is, despite all the good efforts, and there are several, and maybe later we can talk about it, there is still a tendency to work in silo. So all donors have developed positive and good examples to address the nexus, but they still fail to come together to coordinate. And this is particularly true for development actors. And I remember when we did the study, we tried to map out all the different pilot countries that different donors were coming up with. And we ended up with an Excel table that was never ending and impossible to print, because it's difficult to identify a place where efforts are put together in a coordinated fashion. And then the other two challenges I would like to highlight are related to participation of the different stakeholders that sometimes is not up to standards or is variable. And consultations in particular with the international and national NGOs sometimes is lacking. And I have a case study from Cameroon that I can elaborate on if there is an interest. And there is also sometimes what was referred earlier, an artificial distinction between humanitarian and development space and financing. Mm-hmm. And we suffer from it. It's a kind of an existential crisis for an organization like mine that is willing to accompany displaced people from one point to the other. So I think this is important to keep in mind. And then the last challenge that I would like to highlight is the friction that existed, that has already been pointed out very well by Diawari, between principled humanitarian action and donor compliance requirements, and in particular around beneficiary vetting. And I'll be happy to maybe elaborate further on that. So if I have time now, I would like to point to two practical suggestions to take this forward and maybe not address all these challenges, but two things that I believe we can put in practice and we can discuss. The first one is related to quality funding. The colleague that spoke yesterday from Plan mentioned already a good example of quality funding, and I would like to refer to that. There is an opportunity we have in implementing flexible and predictable funding that is conducive to Nexus discussion, is conducive to Nexus implementation, and we can learn from existing experience. We have developed a catalog of best practices for quality funding that are leading to the implementation of better collective outcomes. We have developed a menu, so now the question is what to pick from that menu and how to adapt it to the different contexts and the different donor rules and regulation that we all, of course, understand that exist and needs to be implemented. And yesterday, the colleague from Plan referred to the specific example of the program-based approach, which is implemented at the moment by Norway and Sweden. There are attempts to pilot a similar approach by ECHO with the programmatic partnership, by Germany, I heard in the last few weeks, and other donors are interested. So I think we have something that we can start with, and we can learn from, and from which we can take the experience. And the second and the last suggestion that I would like to make is exactly related to learning and sharing experience. I know that it might appear as a simple suggestion, but it is not. Because we always say in all our recommendations that we need to share, we need to learn, we need to socialize what we are working on. But at the end of the day, we do that very often in open events like this one, and I really thank you, Cha, for the opportunity to have this discussion. But we don't do it at the technical level. We don't do it in closed-door discussion roundtable where we can discuss what works and what not. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges NRC is facing in implementing a specific instrument? What can we do to contribute to the lessons learned of ECHO in the implementation of the pilot, the Nexus pilot countries program? I really think this is important, and would like to offer our support and availability to contribute to that discussion.
Thank you, Cecilia. Maybe very quickly only, you named already there are lessons to be learned, there are good practice examples, best practice examples. I've cited a paper a while ago when you, for example, looked at DFID, former DFID, the UK policies, and on Sweden, SIDA. Are there one or two very quick examples only what you think this has been really a tool worth looking into and that really helped?
Thank you, Ralph. I was hoping to be able to speak a bit more about the SIDA example, but also referring to the experience from DFID. Already in 2015, the UK promoted an aid strategy that aimed at leaving no one behind, that already put the nexus at the center of the debate. And that allowed for the development of joined up country strategies that, of course, had a positive impact in the possibility to implement at country level at the nexus. Again, I think there is a lot that we can learn from that experience if it is shared and if it is put on the table at peer level. So I really think I would like to stimulate this exchange amongst donors. Maybe something is already happening within the GHD and in other platforms, but I believe it's important that a discussion is taken to learn from each other's experience and build on that. SIDA is definitely a champion for the Nexus. Not only the development of the policy framework introduced in 2016 allowed for putting the Nexus at the center, it also provides what I think is important, training opportunities internally to its own staff to learn what we're talking about. So to cascade down to the embassy level that you were referring to earlier, Ralph, what do we mean with the Nexus? It also created a small resilience fund that is ring-fencing funding for discrete Nexus programming. We also have the chance and the opportunity to work together with SIDA at developing a pilot mediation program in the framework of the Conflict Resolution and Peace Security Department of SIDA, which allows for experimenting approaches, allows for testing things on a predictable time frame that allow to learn from the experience and replicate these in other countries.
Thank you, Cecilia. Very good insights, very concrete, very hands-on. Thanks for this input. You mentioned we need the development actors on the table and we need much better coordination with and among the development actors. So, of course, purely by chance, we have a development actor right now with us, and I'm really happy to move on to Martin Schuldes. He's the head of the Peace Division, if I may frame it like that, at the German Development Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. The division, the proper name is Peace and Security, Disaster Risk Management. Martin has a vast experience in conflict settings. He's been twice for years in Afghanistan. He has been dealing a lot with security actors in Afghanistan and beyond, also following up here in Germany with the Defense Ministry and the Academy of the latter here in Berlin. So Martin, if development actors are key to this, and if we maybe focus again a bit on the program side and integration of the program side and the policy side, maybe we can elaborate a bit your view how the German Development Ministry tries to engage in that. You're a bit the one coordinating, because the Peace Division is a policy division. Your efforts to integrate real peace objectives into German policies. How would you name, what is the approach and where do we stand in this debate, which is ongoing for quite some while? Over to you, Martin.
Well, thank you, Ralph, and thanks to my colleagues for all the already very interesting insights. I, if possible, try to also reflect on these insights and in a way try to comment on them. Maybe I start by saying a few words about the context, the relevance of the context. It has already been addressed because that's a very important starting point. And I think what is really relevant for our debate and for the discussion is an observation that the overall context has been changing dramatically. We see not only a huge increase in the number of conflicts, but they are also getting more dynamic and more protracted in a way. And the consequence is that it, in a way, it does not only bring the humanitarian actors on the table, but given the fact that these conflicts are more long-term, I mean, in a way prompt the need to more strongly get the development side also on board. And that should also be the guiding principle for our work. And this is also the way we see our mandate here, not only in the ministry, to get our country desks partners on board and try to shed a light on peace and security issues. People that work in the Africa division, people who are responsible for our bilateral cooperation with Latin America or Asia. So this is public relations work in a way to draw attention to the relevance of the nexus. So this is not very easy, because people are always very busy and say, well, no, we have our portfolio. We work together with Mali or Afghanistan or whichever country. We have well-established sectors. We do water supply, we do energy, we do rule of law. We are already very busy, and then it's sometimes very hard to squeeze in and reserve some time to get their attention and say, well, because you do that, it does have a peace and security dimension, and we should be partners in developing these portfolios further. So this is one way how we try to get the nexus on board in our bilateral and multilateral development cooperation. And another point of view which I would like to draw your attention to is we can do more, and I would say much more, also in two ways. First is on the multilateral level. I should think that the German side, all ministries, especially BMZ, are undertaking tremendous efforts in order to get the peace and security topic and also the nexus more strongly on the multilateral agenda, and also to more strategically develop our cooperation with UN agencies at the service of the nexus. Here we can do much more, and in terms of joint HDP programming, and to be oriented by what we call collective outcomes. And the third one, which has already been addressed, and which is a complicated one, I should say, is also to extend our cooperation jointly with the Federal Foreign Office, with the civil society organizations, with the NGOs. Why is this? Because we think, if we look at the situation, what we observe is what I like to call the erosion of statehood, and the lack of state partners. And if we would like to follow the HDP nexus and support the countries to undergo what we call a transformation towards a post-conflict scenario, we need an all-society approach. It's not enough that we sit together at one table, humanitarian actors, the development actors, but what we need is civil society organizations, representatives from academia, from scientific organizations. So because these transformative processes in our partner countries, we can only support, we can only help. They themselves need to be supported in order to develop the energy and the dynamics towards that kind of transformation. Mm-hmm. Over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, Martin. Many thanks for the great overview. Maybe following up on one point you mentioned openly, it's hard to squeeze in sometimes in the bilateral programs in discussions with colleagues, the peace component, the relevance of conflict sensitivity, etc. If I take that one step further, might it be also in the very first place a key question to have a common understanding of what we mean by peace, what the government means by peace, or one institution like one ministry, which is of course a big body. If we stick to the example of the Sahel region, critics say, well, what might be labeled as peace sometimes is more focusing, investing in police forces, in frontier controls. It's sometimes more linked to building up institutional capacities on the ground, which few people would probably name as peace efforts, while at the same time, of course, that's an important part of German funding, of European funding, etc. Is there also a lack of understanding of what we mean by peace on the government side?
Well, it's a very complicated and complex matter. Whatever notion you take and talk to people, you would certainly... can you hear me and see me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. I got some indication that there's some problem. Well, the point I was making was, regardless of whatever term you put on the table and talk to people, be it peace or resilience or coordination, you would certainly get a variety, a multiplicity of opinions. That is not to say that it's not very relevant and necessary to create and debate that kind of joint understanding. And I do see a lot of willingness and readiness also of our colleagues here in the ministry, but also in our implementing organizations with our partners from the Foreign Office and all other ministries to have that kind of debate and to find a common understanding. Our starting point is that we need a much broader and more comprehensive understanding of peace. Peace certainly is not limited to the absence of violence. So peace in a more sustainable and long-term way certainly means equality of opportunities, so that people, regardless of their ethnicity, of their sexual orientation, of their provenance, that they have the chance to develop their own talents. Peace also means that you have state and public structures that follow a common sense and are oriented by a common good, so as to create opportunities for people. Peace also means fairness in terms of questions that are related to using limited natural resources. So it's a very broad concept, but it's certainly necessary to develop a kind of common understanding. And this is because if you do not have that common, that joint or common kind of starting point, it would certainly be very complicated to develop a joint way and to follow a way that is connected in the sense of the HCP nexus that we are talking about. Right. So it remains a challenge, certainly.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks again for being so frank. So it's surely not good news that we need to start this discussion from scratch in some ways with many partners, and that there is a lot to fix on this front. Let's take a quick second round on the panel before we move to what's been ongoing in the chat. And usually, indeed, when we talk about donors, the chat is very lively and people are very opinionated. So looking forward to that. Michael, if I can turn again a question, picking up from what Martin just said to you. we might have integrated budget lines. We might have disintegrated ones. We might formally split here and there humanitarian development issues. But there is a perception of some practitioners that we have indeed a mixing of objectives. We have a mixing of security objectives in the Sahel, for example. We have a mixing of it with migration policies. And if our development funds are focusing so much on that, if humanitarian assistance is decreasing, as has been a major concern with the new EU financial framework, if some tools of the new EU financial framework might be mixed as still under discussion, and I always struggle to read that, even to read it, to be honest. If we mix the EU Development Fund and the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, NDICI, do you understand that it might raise concerns, and would you agree that there might be some homework to do?
Not quite sure, Ralph, whether I understood your question, but maybe to dispel one misunderstanding, EU development aid is not diminishing. Yeah, it's not diminishing. There will be quite an increase in the next financial period between 21 and 27.
No, the humanitarian angle we talked about. There are concerns that the humanitarian budget might be much lower than expected, if that's correct.
Well, what is expected? I mean, the Commission proposed an increase of humanitarian funding by 30%. And while negotiations are still ongoing between member states and the European Parliament, everything that I know seems to indicate that we are going to get that increase. Now, does this mean we are going to have more money? Not really so. Sorry for abusing of your time here, but if you understand a little bit the kind of intricacies of the humanitarian aid budgeting system that we have in the EU, then you know that in addition to our normal budget, which, as I said, is according to all likelihood going to be increased by about 30%, we are able to draw significantly on reserves in the European budget in order to respond to new urgencies. For example, half of the money that we made available in the response to COVID didn't come from the humanitarian budget, but came from reserves in the EU budget. Much of what we are doing in Turkey for hosting Syrian refugees and, for example, providing social security or also education to them doesn't come from the humanitarian budget, but comes from a reinforcement. Sometimes also our development colleagues give us money. For example, this year, we have received around 90 million euros from DG DEFCO's development budget that was transferred to humanitarian aid because we were able in certain crisis situations to respond more quickly than our development partners. So the question is whether in the future financial systems, these top-ups will also continue. Mm-hmm. So the baseline budget will certainly increase significantly. The question is whether we are going to have the same access to reserves as in the past, and there the jury is still out. But even if we had that, the scissors between the needs on the one hand and the availability of funding, the scissors is opening more and more. And that, I think, is one of the most important reasons why we have to speak about a meaningful nexus and why we have to speak about the innovative financial instruments in humanitarian aid. Because otherwise we are going to fall shorter and shorter of the needs and the requirements.
And would you be happy to comment also on the policy side, this notion that, well, if we talk so much about security issues, about migration issues, if many of the funding and the debates, for example, in the Sahel, are linked to these topics, it might shy away humanitarians to link to what you plan, even in a coordination body, because as Diawari highlighted, there are major concerns that then you lose your impartiality. You might even lose access on the ground in operational terms. Do you see the point that sometimes, even if it's the rhetoric, security, peace, migration issues are pretty much interlinked in the debate by, for example, donors?
Yes, of course I see the point, but let me be utterly pragmatic. I don't care why somebody is giving me money. I care about how I spend it. If somebody wants to give me money because he or she is afraid of irregular migration from a certain country and therefore thinks humanitarian aid might help, fine. As long as I can spend this money according to my humanitarian principles, as long as my implementing partners sign up to these principles, as long as I can fully implement impartiality, independence, as long as I'm not obliged to use this money only in government-held territory, but can also work in territory that is held by armed non-state actors, for example, I'm fine. I'm fine. Give you one example. I just mentioned Turkey. Our biggest programs in humanitarian aid are, in fact, in Turkey. We have the CCTE project, for example, which is social safety net for 1.8 million Syrian refugees. And this costs us €500 million a year, €500 million only this program, which is now implemented by IFRC. Now, we got this money under the EU-Turkey statement of 2016, and it is part of the facility for refugees in Turkey. So if anything, this is political money. But then it is implemented by the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, and is implemented according to humanitarian standards. And as long as that is safeguarded, so to say, as long as this is the case, I don't have a problem if somebody wants to give me money because there may be a political interest. It's not the source of the money, it's the way how it is implemented, I think that counts here.
Many thanks, Michael. I'm hearing you, having been with the World Food Programme, I know about being pragmatic. While, for example, taking the example of Turkey, some people may say, well, what we see in Moria might be linked to these policies as well. But that's another topic I would love to discuss you whenever you might come to Berlin, or we could do a separate discussion on this.
I would say we would have many more Morias if we didn't have our programs in Turkey.
Okay. Your point, fully taken. DRRE, why aren't you just utterly pragmatic? I mean, it's got a point, one might say. You've got the money, and if you can use it in a way which makes sense, which is principled, etc., what's the big deal?
Good. I'm happy that it comes from Michael. And to clarify also, in my previous intervention, ECHO have been remaining consistent regard to their position, regard to the respect of the humanitarian principle. However, in the ground, as it has been mentioned by Cecilia, there are many streams of funding. So when you take a money, whether you decided, I'm not taking this money because of my principle, this is your choice. However, if you take it, you cannot make the choice, the use of it, without having the peer approval. So this is the donor compliance issues. And that makes it more complex. I'm happy that a specific example that have been mentioned, more and more donors are being trying to open to give that level of flexibility. And we need also to comply with the requirement, the donor requirement. It's we cannot compromise neither our humanitarian principle, neither the donor conditionalities. It's clear that the ECHO fund has to be used exclusively for humanitarian. And I'm happy also to hear that BMZ also has started putting some specific example, innovative example where they give that kind of flexibility to move between humanitarian development. These are appreciated, and we are trying to put that into perspective. However, to go back to your specific question, my choice and all of our choice, if you get the money has to be used for the specific purpose the money has been given. It's not like Michael could say, Michael may have a lot of source of funding to decide whether they should. However, when we take the money, we needed to fulfill our humanitarian mandate and at the same time, the donor compliance mechanism. I wanted to be short on that. However, there is a lot of evidence behind that. So we cannot be as pragmatic as we can taking money and use for the humanitarian purpose when that was not initially agreed with the donor. That's why we are advocating for this level of flexibility while maintaining our humanitarian mandate, our principles. And again, another point we talk about, and I'm happy Michael said, there is an increase on the humanitarian fund, 30%. However, in the practice, how much is going under protection? How much is going under conflict sensitivities? How much is going into all these social cohesion building and so on? When you make this, each of the time when there is a eco-HIP that is launched, it's a huge debate with our representative, local representative. Oh, we do not have enough money for this section. And we think also in contexts like Mali today, those are the most sensitive one. However, we do not have adequate money for that. How we could deal with that?
Thank you, Diawari. Maybe can I quickly follow up with one question and give the floor back to you
Yes.
on the EU Trust Fund to stick a bit to this example. Does Michael have a point? Because I mean, this position paper we discussed criticizing the EU Trust Fund has been signed by many NGOs from Mali, but most of them have taken a pragmatic approach in the follow-up, if I'm well informed, and have applied for the trust fund and have argued, for example, in interviews with us, that as long as they can do something pragmatic, if they can do the right thing, why shouldn't they do so? And of course, it's a lot of competition out there. So does Michael have a point on that one? Can you still hear me, Diawari?
Oh, okay.
The floor is back to you. Sorry for shocking you.
To Michael. Yes, this is another element we face here. We jointly sign up a principle. Say, okay, we wanted to stick to the double nexus, and that was fine. And what we found when the second phase, I need to clarify the EU Trust Fund, there is a first phase in Mali and there was the second phase. When the second phase was issued, everyone went embarrassed regard to the conditionality that was. And we put together and we wrote back. We had a meeting with the EU delegation. And we went back up to the headquarters to say, these are principles, that are some things that compromise. Can we take off of it? But at a certain point, oh, there have been, no one said openly, we are not, but we will see how we take it. But you know, the decision-taking process, the decision-making process, you have to make the decision to apply. Probably at the contractual stage, you may have some strong negotiation, but you know, the power dynamic between a donor and implementing NGOs, where it is a kind of survival for some of the partners who are exclusively focused on those kind of funding. They do not have the luxury. And that's one element. The second element is the decision power between headquarters of some of those NGOs and the local representative. And we know even the nexus is not a uniform understanding between all the Sahel region. You may find another Sahel country who has a different perspective because the government have been able to impose the Triple Nexus. Michael said it. Mali has not gone to that. There is no adoption. But this is another important element. Government has the power, and they said, okay, we adopt the Triple Nexus. What's the definition? What they wanted to achieve through the Triple Nexus. Donor wanted to prone, and the UN system wanted to prone the Triple Nexus. And at the moment, the engine become like a kind of in the middle. And you have to decide or to take or not when you are facing financial survival crisis, then the decision becomes very challenging. Probably Cecilia may know a lot about it because that's many of our NGOs, our peer NGOs have been confronted to that decision. Somehow the decision even to take the money was not in their hand at the local level, at the ground level. This is the reality.
Thank you, Diawari, and thanks for pointing already to Cecilia. Perfectly positioned to comment on that. Cecilia, what's your take? I mean, you raised a couple of points which would be really important to talk about. And really important for NGOs jointly promote, but at the same time we see a lot of competition out there and not always a lot of coordination, including the advocacy side. Is that an issue where NGOs also need to be more aware that in this way a nexus might be helpful as well?
Well, Thank you. It is a difficult question, because especially when the situation becomes challenging, then competition increases, and competition for resources is definitely, as I said before, a driver for a lack of coherence. I really believe that when we come together, when we are able to rally around a unifying challenge like we have done in Mali, we are definitely stronger, and we are able to put forward a principled approach that is in line with what our mission and mandate is. I think it's important that we also, as NGOs, try to be honest about the challenge that we face in taking this decision. Yawari was pointing to it. It is an internal dilemma every time we have to cope with this situation. And we have to develop, and we are trying to do it as NRC, we have developed internal policies that allow us to guide our staff in taking this decision. But this is a real challenge. We have developed a toolkit for principled humanitarian action to help ourselves and colleagues to navigate through these dilemmas posed by our intention and ambition to remain principled as we are, but at the same time confronted with the pragmatism that Michael was referring to, because we want to deliver, we want to stay, we want to be able to assist the population that we are meant to do so. So I really think it's important that we share those challenges, but we maintain a really principled approach and have red lines that we cannot cross. And that the red line that I want to refer to is the one that I hinted at the end of my initial contribution around beneficiary vetting. This is an issue that is challenging for NGOs. Beneficiary vetting is not imposed, of course, by humanitarian donors, but it comes into picture whenever we approach development actors that are not familiar with IHL, are not familiar with principled humanitarian action. And then what do? We cannot breach IHL. We cannot breach the principles and share information about our own beneficiaries and avoid providing assistance to people that are designated as a terrorist. We cannot do that. And we have a red line that we have to keep. This, as a consequence, limit our capacity to access Nexus funding. So we don't have a solution to that, but it is a challenge that we are facing, and it's important that we keep the focus on that.
Thanks, Cecilia. Maybe just to share with everybody who might not be an expert on the vetting discussion and counterterrorism issues, this beneficiary vetting, surely a crucial debate. To which extent aid actors should share information about their beneficiaries and their background with donors, which is of course sensitive in many contexts. Martin, to conclude this final round on the panel, maybe with a final question to you. You've been based in Afghanistan twice. You know so much about development and security cooperation on that front. Michael made the point, why should agencies care about where the money is coming from? If we link that to a long-standing German debate about civil-military cooperation, that it's sometimes a conditionality of the German Development Ministry to cooperate on the civil military side in what we called in German vernetzte Sicherheit. Would you agree that aid actors should be more pragmatic, and as long as they can do the right thing with the funds, why debate so much about conditionality?
Well, that's a huge question, and we could certainly talk a very long time about it. I think what Michael certainly did not mean is that whoever is providing money, mean person included or so, that would not count in any way. Certainly not.
But that was a nice quote. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. I found it quite interesting, saying, well, that's one facet of being pragmatic. Well, if we are living in a world of huge problems with very limited funding, so we always have to have a debate about the opportunity costs. You can spend €1 only once. So that's a reality we all have to face. But certainly to to have a frame of reference, which is also not only guided by interests, but also by values. I mean, that applies to the EU, its member states, and German Development Corporation as well. I think that's unquestionable. Certainly, I mean, if we look at my time in Afghanistan, we had a lot of discussions about that, and also critical articles in the press. Who are these guys who you are working with? They are warlords. They have not the best or most shiny CVs in their pocket. So why are you working with them? Sometimes it's one facet of being pragmatic, that you don't have anybody else, so you rather try to be selective and find ways of working with these people. But that never has been the only route of cooperation. We always followed a 330 degrees perspective, trying to find other partners for a cooperation, for our dialogue in the civil society community with other donors, in order to, in a way, if you allow that, limit the number of people that might have some questionable biographies. Well, I mean, that shows the complexity of the context. And maybe one, if you allow me, in the discussion earlier, there was the point of conditionality. Is there any friction with the neutrality of what our humanitarian colleagues are doing? My experience tells me that it's always good to look at these things from not only that we look into the mirror, but that we look at the perspective of the target group. And sometimes you come to the conclusion that for those people on the ground, they don't really care about all our debates about the mandate or where are the sources of money. What they are expecting is that if we tell them that we are ready to support, that we do that in a way that also is respectful, and this is a very important point, that includes their perspectives and the way they see their future, and that we undertake all efforts to incorporate their knowledge and their lessons learned. And in my experience, that's not only a precondition, but gives you the best prospects for long-term solutions if you incorporate local perspectives. And that's why, and this is my final word, that's why I very much appreciate the ongoing and increasing debate about the relevance of localization. That's maybe a fun point from my side.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. Surely a very important point we can agree on, all of us. Naming localization. This afternoon we will have a spotlight session, actually the concluding session of this conference on localization. And please stay tuned and join us for that one. Now we would like to bring in the audience and what we've heard from the chat. And that's done once again by my colleague Darina.
Hello, Ralph. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to feed in some questions from the chat. The chat has again been very lively. And I have at least 3 complexes of questions. So let me start with the first one. It is about politics and assistance. So Akram says that, well, in the beginning, you were talking about conflicts as being one of the root causes for humanitarian crisis and limited development. So related to this, Akram is asking, who is actually fueling this conflict? Is it not also those countries selling arms to conflict-affected areas? And is it not the same countries who also provide the humanitarian assistance? Should we not have a holistically reflected approach on those countries? And can we maybe shed some light on that? And secondly, Philipp Frisch from MSF says, isn't it really naive to expect that there is no strings, political strings attached to the money that is given to humanitarian actors with a very clear political agenda? And with this regard, also, we would have many less Morias when Europe would stop pushing back vulnerable people to to other places where they're coming from. So this is the first complex that I would like to give over to you, and I hope we have time to at least one more.
Let's make sure we can raise a couple of more questions from the floor. We started something like 5 minutes late, so we may overstretch a bit, if that's fine for our panel. Martin, if you don't mind to share the difficult question on coherence of policies in a way, as Akram highlighted it. Who's fueling these conflicts? I mean, you have a difficult task. You are in a new job for 2 months, I believe, on a cross-cutting issue like peace. At the same time, it will be very hard to achieve something on the peace front if there is no coherent policies. And there has been a lot of debate about arms sales regulation, about arms sales to Yemen, into these conflicts. And Michael, if you would like to comment also on the European level, because there has been also talk about not really following the guidelines and the regulations vis-à-vis these conflicts named in the latest policies on arms sales. So maybe with this, a quick feedback from Martin, followed by Michael, if you don't mind.
Well, I was hoping that you do not address me,
I guess,
with regard to answering this question, but certainly there's no way out, and I will do my level best. I mean, the world is very complex, and we should not shy away from the many realities that we are confronted with. What I should think, and I think I could really say, is that the rules and regulations that exist in the many countries that also with their economies are involved in that kind of business, if you allow me to be diplomatic here, they are different. So with regard to Germany, the rules and regulations that would allow arms producing companies to do so, to produce them and to export them, are I don't have any international comparison, but my feeling is that they are rather or very, very strict, and that doesn't mean that no products are being exported, but the rules and regulations are crafted and implemented in a way that strongly disallows the exporting of weapons into conflict-affected areas. At least that's, I mean, I'm from Development Cooperation Ministry, and that kind of question should go anywhere else, Ministry of Defense or Ministry of the Economy. But that's my opinion. That can certainly be criticized, but by international comparison, that's not very far away from the reality, I should think. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. Of course, the key question is going to the other ministries, but at the same time, it's a question of coherence and the question of how far one can get with peace efforts in a certain framework. Michael, over to you. European arms sales policies, and maybe you might also comment quickly, if I take it correctly from MSF, maybe the best humanitarian policies linked to migration issues in Europe would be to have a more liberal migration policy. Is that a fair point?
Well, on the first question, Ralph, I'm not the ultimate expert of the conflict in Mali, but if you look at who are the big players in humanitarian aid worldwide, it's the United States, it's the European Union, it's Germany and the UK. And if you look at the European member states, you have only 2 member states that have really significant humanitarian aid, that is Germany and Sweden. And then after that, you have Denmark, you have the Netherlands, and 2 or 3 others perhaps. Now, I don't believe that the arms export policy of any of these countries is the conflict or the source of conflict in Mali. And if you look at the deterioration of the situation in Burkina Faso over the past 2 years, which was dramatic, I also don't think that European arms export policies are the cause for that. What the cause of it is, for example, absence of governance, is bad governance, lack of social services, resources conflicts, and so forth. And when people kill each other, maybe the Avari can comment on that. In my experience, it is more with Kalashnikovs than with Heckler and Koch weapons in those conflicts. Now, that doesn't mean that the theory is wrong, so to say, but I would like to put it in a perspective. So I don't think that you can draw, let's say, an easy equation between arms sales here and humanitarian conflict there. There is, of course, a grain of truth in this, but I think the reality is usually much more complex. On the second question, now we are leaving humanitarian aid and development aid here and getting into migration policy. What I can tell you is that, of course, nobody here is happy with the state of play that we have in irregular migration. This is for that reason that a month ago, the European Commission proposed a new European migration policy. And I think it is indeed one of the big shames of European policy making that so far the 27 member states have not yet been able to agree on anything that could overhaul the existing problem. But what I also know is if we opened the European member states to migration of any sort, if we had what you call a liberal migration policy, we would not have a European Union any longer. The whole thing would explode, and I'm not sure we would have a more liberal and a more citizen-friendly and refugee-friendly order after that.
Thank you, Michael. Back to the arena. We have one quick final round, and then we need to conclude.
Perfect. Thank you for giving me the floor again. So I'd like to introduce 2 more general points and then a few questions for individual panelists. So the general points is first and foremost one post by a user called Relene, who wants to draw our attention to gender and protection mainstreaming in financing. This has been talked about for years now, but she doesn't see, that person doesn't see any concrete action in that sense. So can that issue be addressed in some way? And secondly, Cecilia Roselli made the important point that development actors are often missing in this discussion. So what can be done to also encourage development actors to engage in this and in this HDP Nexus discussion? And what can the organizations themselves do? Specifically addressing some of the panelists, Katrina Woyle wants to jump into the discussion on sharing lessons learned, and her question goes into the direction of Michael Köhler, and she's asking, can the EU share some insights and lessons learned so far? What is working and what needs to be improved on the side of the donor, but also on the side of the implementing partners? A question posed by Markus Geiser towards the donors again is related to taking the nexus into the multilateral sphere, like Martin Schuldes just put it before. Would then burden sharing not also mean to engage not only with the UN, the World Bank, but also other donors and coordinate more closely with them also regarding concepts of stabilization and so on? He's mentioning the Asian Development Bank, for example. So maybe we can shed some light on that. And finally, I wanted to introduce a point that has been introduced by Anja Osterhaus and has been discussed already quite intensively in the chat. And she has raised the concern that she heard that humanitarian actors are being put in serious risk because they are accused to accept European funding in Mali. And with this regards, also Mr. Köhler mentioned earlier in the discussion that funding is linked to development and not only the humanitarian agenda of the EU. So Anja is asking, should we also address this problem in Mali and elsewhere? Would this not be urgent an urgent question to answer. So that's my very few last points, and thank you again for the chat. It's been very lively.
Thank you, Darina. Very few, 5 points, which is well beyond our time limit, I guess. So let me try to sum it up and maybe link it also to your final statements. But initially, I may give the floor to Cecilia, who has been addressed. Any views how it could materialize to better engage development actors? Martin made his points, so maybe Cecilia, any views on that one, and of course on any of the other points, if you are happy to comment.
Thank you. So I totally agree. We tend to preach to the converted, so we don't have always the right audience with us. The Grand Bargain was an opportunity to engage with the World Bank. We have used it. I have lost a bit of faith in the Grand Bargain in this long journey, but I still believe that we can continue to use that as a platform where we all sit together. In addition, are we willing to set up platforms where we have the opportunity to exchange between donors coming from development field and humanitarian field? I'm hesitant to create new structures and new platforms because I think we have way too many already. But I think this conversation must happen at country level, first and foremost, where the coherence and the coordination is needed. And it has to happen also at global level, but we can find avenues building on what already exists. Then I'd like to take 1 minute for a commercial, so I'll address the question on protection and gender, because we are about to release a research with the Global Protection Cluster on financing protection. And we will exactly look at where are the challenges, what are the trends, and what are the suggestions to put protection back at the center. The study will be released on the 30th of November, and I will share an invitation for the event.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cecilia. Diawari, any comments on how to, as Oxfam is a dual mandate organization, and you have the development colleagues in-house, do you have any further views how we can bridge, especially from the humanitarian side to the development colleagues, let alone bring the peace experts in?
Thank you. I think there is a lot to learn out of it. For me, to take away, dual organization, and that is one of our ideal situation, and we have been advocating with donors, communities, to put in place a mechanism that gives certain level of flexibility while you are undergoing on the development work, and to move to the humanitarian when the situation arises. When you are in the humanitarian situation, how you could build a kind of stabilization, a kind of recovery to the longer term development. And this is a kind of a very pragmatic and operational way how we take it. And thanks to many of our donors during the COVID experience, many of them have agreed on giving that kind of flexibility so you can use the ongoing development funding to make the response. There was not any new stream of funding for the COVID, even it was asked, but this flexibility has happened, and it helps us also to build our capacity. Martin has mentioned the localization, and we have also built that. We work with local partners in terms of acceptances, and because they know better the condition, is not to transfer the risk, but it is how they can better respond to that. I have few specific asks from this conference. These are some of the recommendation coming from the Nexus position paper the NGOs Forum in Mali has sent. First of all, since these are the same community who are funding the humanitarian and the development work, why we cannot make a deliberate choice to make a separation between the military effort with the humanitarian? Why are we engaging military? Are we funding military from the specific military response, security response, to be engaged on the humanitarian response? This is one thing that can be a concrete recommendation to make sure that the line is very clearly defined. And the second thing, how we could fund dedicated resources, conflict sensitivities, social cohesion, peace building, and Cecilia has mentioned also this protection that is coming as a kind of losing part when everyone recognized the importance on the peace building. So, and just to, okay, probably I don't want to go further because I know you are limited on the time, but I think we have a lot to ask for this opportunity to make sure that humanitarian mandate is preserved from this. I'm not saying one is not important, but we need to make a deliberate.
Right.
When you see the volume of funding that is being earmarked to a country like Mali, I remember we have just concluded the Sahel conference last week. The pledge that has been made is quite encouraging. However, when you see the way the pledge has been made, it looks like, okay, we are reinforcing this nexus, but we need to work enough to make sure that the conditionality, and we need to deliberate, because of, we have almost said the humanitarian funding have been underfunding in Mali, 40% out of each of the requests. So how we make sure that this humanitarian funding is not including with the global pledge. So you say, oh, Mali has got this level, Sahel has got this level of funding. However, in reality, the specific amount that's going to the specific need at the vulnerable community is relatively weaker. And
Thank
smaller.
you. Thank you, dear Wari, and thanks for responding already to my final question in your conclusion of that one. I take it as your key ask for the World Humanitarian Summit next year, or for its 5th anniversary, which will be my concluding question to the other panelists. What would be your key ask, your key outcome you want to see 5 years after the World Humanitarian Summit? And we heard from dear Wari about flexible funding and about taking a very clear cut on division of labor between the military and the humanitarian world. Michael, if I can link that final question, there has been from the chat, what have been the lessons learned from the EU countries? Maybe you could name the key lesson learned from the EU pilot countries and your experience with the Triple Nexus so far as one of your key wish and key asks also for the anniversary of the World Humanitarian Summit next year. In like one sentence, what would be your key takeaway for that?
I think there are two key lessons concerning the Nexus and concerning the Grand Bargain. Concerning the Nexus, it's more about organizational readiness. At least on the donor side, we talk a lot about the Nexus, we have conceptualized it, we have some good pilot examples, but in reality, we are not ready for it. We are not ready because we have 2 or 3 different organizational cultures for humanitarian, for development, for peace. We have different communities. We don't talk to each other enough. We have different project cycles for different rules, different time frames, different notions of ownership and so forth, and that needs to be merged. On the Grand Bargain, I would be in favor of a reality test, and I'm very much with Cecilia. The Grand Bargain was great, but it was also naive. Now, 5 years on, we have tested in reality. And I think we have to be very honest now, 5 years on, and tell each other, the implementing side and the donor side, where we are disappointed. We're in the situation of a couple in its 7th year, when the romanticism is over. And if not, you don't start creating this couple again by being truthful, by being honest, by speaking about your disappointments with the other side, then you're going to head for divorce. But we are not yet there. I think we can still head for a happy marriage if we tell each other the truth. And if we then make an attempt, and I see some good examples in the COVID response, for example, if we then make an attempt that implementing partners satisfy the donors more, donors satisfy the implementing partners and altogether we do what the Avari recommended us, that is to see what is necessary on the ground and speak with the people who ultimately we are working for.
Thank you, Michael. Cecilia, Michael hopes for a happy marriage after all next year, but also a reality check, which can be very useful even in marriage. So what would your key wish for next year?
I'd be happy to continue that conversation because it's definitely what is needed for on the Grand Bargain, to have a frank and open debate and see what works and what not. My wish is to have concrete action and not debates around risk sharing. And that is, in one sentence, what will solve a lot of the pending points related to the Grand Bargain.
Thank you. That was in one phrase.
We don't have the time.
Thanks for being so much to the point. Martin, the final word is yours.
Well, that's a privilege. I had time to note down something, and I will read it for you. That's my takeaway and my wish on the way to the 5th anniversary. It's jointly take more HCP pilots up into the air, have them land safely with positive collective outcomes that serve as an encouragement to mainstream HDP.
Thank you, Martin. That has been phrased in a way that I have nothing to add, apart from a big thank you to all of you. Big thank you to Martin, to Michael, to Cecilia, to Diawari. This has been really lively, and we had nice controversies on the table. So many thanks. That was the idea, and many thanks for making it live up to at least our expectations. We take now a little break before we continue at noon with the next guests, and we will discuss then if we look at how the Triple Nexus is playing out in practice and all its limitations, if we look on the policy level how abstract it is still for many agencies, but at the same time there is a great push to look into Triple Nexus efforts and to make organizations engage. What does that mean, especially for multi-mandated organizations? How shall they deal with the Triple Nexus? On that one, we want to share with you an analysis model we have developed over the course of past months, looking into 3 different spheres of analysis and sharing 3 options for agencies with you. And to see if that might fly, if it's hands-on, we will discuss with 3 practitioners in less than 15 minutes. So stay tuned and see you soon. Thank you.